Since February, I have been working as academic director at Skyeng, which is a very big online school. But we are not going to talk about online schools right now. But my topic today is, and I'm going to start showing my presentation, if I may. Yeah, that works. I'm going to share some techniques to show what we can do to activate students' thinking in EFL Classroom. Normally, we talk about speaking, writing, reading, and other skills, but thinking is at least as important as everything else, because if you look at some issues in online teaching, you will see that here are the questions that teachers seem to ask most of the time, like how can we help students to actively work with information? How can we use internet resources for this purpose? How can we get students to work more actively? And how can we make sure that this does not increase the teacher's workload, which is very, very important, because the pandemic time and the online teaching have led to a huge increase in teachers' workload recently. Now, the entire EFLtalks today have been covering a lot of these issues. So I hope that I will be able to draw your attention to one more thing, one more side of this thing. What can help us? First of all, we can shift the focus of students' work from information search, because very often they only have to read a text and answer a few questions. That is, to find information in the text. So we can shift the students' focus of attention from information search to information processing. We can use some techniques which boost students' cognitive development. I'm going to show them to you. And we can use some techniques from project-based learning and task-based learning. So let's have a look at what can be done. For example, when you want to get junior students to think, odd one out tasks seem to do the trick really well on one condition. Like, for example, if you ask the students to find the odd word in this task, sand, snow, towel, and sun, it allows for various answers. Like, for example, some students would say that towel is the wrong word here, the odd one out, because it begins with a different letter. Some will say that snow is a different thing, because everything else describes a situation in the summer. And then students will talk about number of letters and stuff like that. And this is okay that they provide different reasons, as long as they do provide different reasons. So every time you present your students with an odd one out task, make sure you ask them why. So they have to give reasons for the answer. Much the same purpose is reached if you do the task like continue the line. So you give a number of words and you ask your students to say which word may come next. Like, for example, sweets, sugar, chocolate, and then they may come up with any words provided that can explain these things. So this gets them thinking, not just focusing on vocabulary, but at the same time, they brush up a whole range of vocabulary. Another thing that you can do is you can ask your students to match a part and the whole object. Like, like, for example, when you do a puzzle, you have a picture and you have some objects, and you need to match parts to the objects. Or better still, you can give them a part of a macro photo, a very, very enlarged photo, which makes it really difficult to recognize what is actually being photographed. And you ask your students to recognize the whole object. Like, for example, you give them a picture of a stem of an apple, which looks like a huge wooden log. And they need to tell that this is an apple. They may have some other ideas, but the main thing here is, same as with the previous tasks, is to ask the students to explain what makes them think so. So in this way, they not only brush up the vocabulary, but they match, they analyze, they synthesize information. And for the same purpose, video quizzes can be used. There are plenty of them on YouTube. They're absolutely free, much the same as the other link in the middle of the slide. Everything's free, everything's there. You don't even have to spend much time to find these things. When it comes to older students, there are some more tasks to activate their thinking and processing information. Sorry about the line in Russian. That was my idea. So basically, that's how we can develop analytical thinking skills in students when they work with text and videos. For example, you can ask them to read about a period, to watch a video about a historic period, and to create a timeline of events. And they can use any of the free timeline creators like this one, or on Canva, or on some other free web services. Or you can ask your students to watch a video or to read a story and write down 5 key events or 5 features of something and explain why these events are the key ones. So you do not tell them which events to write about, but you rather let the students decide which ones are the most important. Of course, once again, they will come up with rather different answers. So this may become the basis of a discussion and of further analysis and synthesis. You can ask your students to characterize certain characters from a story. And with the next group of students, you can use the characteristics provided by the previous group and to ask the next group of students to match the characters and their characteristics. So at the same time, they exercise analytical thinking and synthetic thinking. Or alternatively, you can ask your students to read a story and tick the topic that is not mentioned in the story. Typically, what you will see in an exercise like that is read a story and tick the topic of the story. But this is done very easily. So to do that, students normally need to read the first lines of each paragraph only. While when they need to decide which topic is not mentioned there, they will have to go deeper. They have to go beyond the surface of the information and to read more and compare things, and perhaps sometimes compare and contrast things from different parts of the story. And once again, when you require your students to work with different parts of the story, rather than simply searching for a keyword in a certain paragraph, you can ask them questions like this. Like, for example, what kind of person is this character? Or, for example, there is a line, she did a strange thing. Why did this thing seem strange? So all these why kind of questions lead to more thinking and to explaining. Of course, students will not be able to do it on the top of the head. They will need to be taught how to do it, but we have already covered some possible ways in the previous slide. Matching exercises also work really well for this purpose. When you have to match information from different information sources. Like, for example, you can ask students to watch an additional video which adds some information to the textbook, and then ask them what information from the video is not mentioned in the textbook. Or you can ask them to read about the reign of a certain king or about some other historic period, and then look at the timeline. And by the way, this can be the timeline created by the students in one of the previous exercises. And then you ask your students to match the timeline and a particular part of the reign to understand which part of the reign it describes. Or you can ask the students to read a paragraph in the textbook, watch a video, and prepare an explanation for the classmates of how something is done. Like, for example, how a particular tense is formed and used, or how some process happens, or perhaps some other kind of explanation. But once again, the students will have to think about the audience. They will have to select information very carefully, and they will have to process the information. So once again, by setting this task, we boost students' analytical thinking. And for example, you can ask your students to read a text and watch a TED Talk on the same topic, and you can ask them then to analyze what the authors and the speaker agree on and what they disagree on. And this is a very TOEFL format task, but with the only difference that in the TOEFL format, starting from 2020, they do not have agreements in the video and in the listening and in the reading task. There is always a disagreement, and here we leave some room for agreement. You can also ask the students to do mini research, like for example, mini research projects. And when I say mini research, I mean something that can be done within the space of one lesson. So you can ask them to do mini research to answer why questions. Like, for example, why is there no official language on the federal level in the USA? And a lot of students are surprised to find out that the American Constitution does not state an official language, unlike the constitutions of some particular states. Or you can ask your students to do a project to test a hypothesis. Like, for example, many sayings you typically see in textbooks, like, for example, it is raining cats and dogs, are hardly ever used in modern colloquial English. Is that true? And the students will have to go and do some research, like, they'll have to Google those things. They can use Youglish to find examples of videos using those sayings. They can use English corpus or some other research tools. Or, for example, to give you an example of the easiest task to organize, you can ask your students to research or even to brainstorm tasks like list as many examples of this rule in real life as you can. And when it comes to some internet resources, there are two resources that I'm happy to recommend. The problem is that there are lots and lots of internet resources that can be used, but it is rather difficult to focus on those resources that are directed at students of particular levels and that are built around specific task types that students will need for exams, unless we are talking about resources which are dedicated specifically to taking TOEFL exam or IELTS or whatever. But when you think about Russian resources, Russian English language resources, you will find such resources as SkySmart, which is a free interactive workbook with thousands of exercises, about 100,000 of them, for school textbooks. This is the address, you see it on the screens. And one more web service, which is called Titel.online, which is a growing online library of EFL textbooks. Right now, as the name suggests, there are textbooks published by Titel publishers, but we're going to expand this library and to add some more resources so that you can use these books online from any browser, from any place, even on your smartphone for lessons. So basically, to sum up, as my time is running out, I'd like to say that these techniques are universal. They do not depend on a particular textbook or a program, so they can be used with any textbook, basically. And they enable students to learn to actively process information, to analyze it, to compare, and to build up on various sources and test hypotheses. And that's something which is much larger than just searching for information, searching for answers in a text. And these techniques do not increase the teacher's workload because most of the work is done by the students, including creation of tasks for each other. So this is it. In case you want to ask some questions, here's my email address. You can find me on Facebook. And thank you very much for giving me the time and the ground to talk about these things.
Great. Well, Alexey, that was great. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's not only many